Assalamu alaikum, I'm Carl Arrindell and you're watching In Focus. Now I'm joined today by Dr. Essam Mustafa, or Abu Yusuf as he's more commonly known. Dr. Mustafa is the Vice Chairman of Interpal, the British charity formed in the wake of the signing of the Oslo Accord in 1994 and in full and optimistic expectation of assisting in the rebuilding of Palestine, which had been, if you like, subject at the time to decades of conflict. Whilst the initial optimism became somewhat dampened as the expected peace failed to last, Dr. Essam Mustafa has for 30 years been dedicated and in fact pioneered a remarkable range of humanitarian initiatives, often at great personal cost, in order to assist in relieving the ongoing suffering of the beleaguered Palestinians under occupation in Palestine and in refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria and Jordan and the wider diaspora. Dr. Essam Mustafa, or should I call you Abu Yusuf, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to
salam, and welcome to you in Gaza.
Now I've known you for many years and seen you working to build projects and initiatives for the benefit of the beleaguered people of Palestine, whether in occupied Palestine or in the refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria or Jordan. It's a rare thing though to be able to sit here in Gaza, a place from which only recently you were unable to travel. What does it feel like to be here on Palestinian soil again at this time?
Thank you for this interview. This is not our first time into Gaza. My first time came after 40 years of diaspora. I've been forced with my family to go out of Palestine in 1967 war. And since that time, I have not been able to return to Palestine. Thanks God that we have made it. And we came by May 2010 to Gaza, to our beloved land of Palestine. Part of Palestine, but doesn't matter. It's Palestine at the end of it. And Alhamdulillah, we feel so proud that we are among our people here in Gaza. But what is worse than this, what's the worst of it, is to see our people suffering under occupation, and not only the occupation, but unfortunately also that the people of Gaza are living under the siege, illegal, inhumane, and it is totally unreasonable in all its aspects. And we are here to say to the world that we are here to bring Gaza to the world and to bring the world to Gaza. And by doing so, we want to tell the whole world the truth of what is happening, the crime which is committed against our people in Gaza.
Now, if I may just reflect back, Interpal was actually formed mostly at your effort in the wake of the optimism, as I said earlier on, of the Oslo Accord, an agreement which sadly did not live up to its expectations. 17 years later, some have actually described the conditions now with the upheaval across the Middle East and so on as worse than they were 17 years ago.
And this is the reality, and this is where we have seen it even before the imposed siege against Gaza, the illegal siege on Gaza. We know that the international figures, they were talking and mentioning that and quoting that the percentage of Palestinians living under the poverty line is between 60 to 70%. Now, with the siege imposed on Gaza, the international figures talk about 80%. So the reality is, who is imposing the poorness in the Palestinian community, on the Palestinian, not only in Palestine itself, but even we have seen it, the conditions of Palestinians being in Lebanon or Jordan or Syria, that the Palestinians are under poverty by levels of, by average of something like over 60%. And this is where we can understand it. It's not only the siege, but it's the occupation. The Israeli occupation, which forced the Palestinians to be refugees in their own country. Now 70% of Palestinians living in Gaza, 70% of Palestinians living in the West Bank, 70% of Palestinians living in Israel, 1948, those 70% of those people are refugees themselves. They are displaced from their own villages, their own towns, their own cities. And we are seeing the inhumane situation that those people are living in it.
Now, a report published last week by the United Nations Works Relief Agency, UNRWA, described the conditions as having worsened during the last 4 years especially. And they were suggesting that unemployment had reached a staggering 42.5%, one of the highest levels in the world, especially in the second half of 2010. Now, the report actually informs us that the number of people living on just over $1 a day, the benchmark, if you like, for poverty, has tripled during that period. That's obviously the siege that you were just referring to. Do you find these statistics disheartening, given the commitment and work which you have dedicated yourself to over the last?
Of course, it's disheartening everyone. It is also, we feel the pain. We live the pain of those people. On what crime? The Palestinians, they are not the occupiers. The Palestinians are not the who killed 50,000 or over 100,000 people. It's not the Palestinians who injured over 50,000 Palestinians. It's not the Palestinian who destroyed over than 10,000 Palestinian, 50,000 housing or houses. It is the Israelis who've done all that against the Palestinians. So this is the reality. It's very sad. It is inhumane, and it's totally unacceptable.
Now,
from people call themselves the only democracy in the Middle East, the civilized country, and yet they are acting against the civilized people.
Now, on a more specific note, the health minister in Gaza, Dr. Essam Mustafa, last week in a press conference referred to the current situation in Gaza as being in a state of major crisis. He said many vital services are having to be stopped, and he feared things would spiral out of control because Gaza just doesn't have essential medicines and supplies that it needs. Now, according to Al-Mazan Center for Human Rights, the shortage is about 50% of the so-called essential drugs list. In all of your years working towards providing humanitarian relief, do you actually recall seeing conditions as bad as this?
It's worse than this. We've seen it. We live it. We've been visiting the hospitals. We've been visiting the medical centers. We've been visiting the people in their homes. We have visited even the prisons, the government prisons, and we've seen how inhumane the situation are. We are seeing children dying because of lack of medicines. We have seen that we have been requested to bring a special baby milk because this milk is not available in Gaza. And if the children, 70 cases of those little baby who cannot find this milk, either they will die or they will become disabled. We have seen the disabled everywhere, and they have no facilities for them. We are talking about there is shortages in medicine, 300 items, according to the international figure, that it is zero value in the Palestinian health authority here in Gaza. And we went to the storage of the medicine storages here in Gaza, and we've seen many shelves empty. So what is happening here, that we are seeing children dying, we are seeing elderly people dying, people with kidney problems dying, people with heart problems dying. So at the end of it, we've also went and visited the schools, and we've seen many schools being destroyed. We have seen mosques being destroyed, and I wonder why civilian buildings and civilians services are destroyed.
Now, a recent Norwegian government-sponsored delegation visited Gaza and produced a report. It was published in the Lancet publication. They described the situation here as heartbreaking. They said doctors were impressive in the way they worked, but on the whole, frustrated. They said they saw what was necessary to be done, but they were simply unable to do it. Doctors said they had to constantly improvise with what was ever available, recognizing, of course, that often drugs were about to expire, and they had to improvise in order to find some way of alleviating pain and to maintain some sort of process, even though they were often in breach of normal international conditions. Now, the health minister only this morning met with me and told me that, Carl, this was the reality on the ground now. This was the reality here in Gaza. Do you think this is a situation that can be allowed to continue?
This situation, our delegation are living it. I've been told in the last 2 days that many of the members of the delegation, they have bugs in their stomach. They are suffering diseases in their stomach. And this is very much related to different things. The white phosphoric, maybe it's poisoning the water, it's poisoning the air. But we have seen it that the shortages in food, yes, maybe as John Geng, the head of the UNRWA, the previous head of UNRWA, when we visited him last time, he said, you can find items on the shelves, luxury item on the shelves, but how many people can buy it? So even if there were some of these items available, but because that 80% of the people living under the poverty line, then it is out of their reach. But the reality, this is a break heart, it hurts your hearts, it kills your heart. It makes you cry, and we've seen our delegation crying everywhere. Yesterday we've been sitting with the families of the prisoners, and everyone is telling us their stories.
The situation is desperate, Dr. Mustafa. I remember we visited the Al Shifa hospital, and there was a 5-month-old baby, Nassim, who had a hole in his heart. And his mother described to me how they'd been waiting since he was born for the possibility of a transfer to a hospital in Israel or Jordan. And that this was something, it was a bit like a lottery, whether or not that might ever take place. And the child's life was on the line as a result of it. It's not just a shortage of drugs, it's a shortage of expertise, isn't it?
It is. There is shortage of expertise, there is shortages of resources, there is shortages of everything. And we know that while we were sitting in Cairo, waiting to enter to Gaza, we received so many calls, so many requests to provide some of the medicines for a little child. And unfortunately, we searched for it in Egypt, and we couldn't find this medicine. We have received so many calls that the people saying, come on, our kids are dying. We've met with 8 of the cases that we've shown on Al-Hiwar, and we've seen the little child burned, his body is all burned. We've seen people with the liver problems, and we've seen people with kidneys problem. We've seen a little girl with her arm muscles being lost because of the Israeli attacks. So this is a reality. And the world now, even the head of the United Nations is now calling and urging the governments not to send or not to allow the flotilla to be going to Gaza on a humanitarian issue.
I'll come to that issue in a moment. It's a very important one you've brought up. But I just want to look back on the fact that earlier this month, Dr. Naim, the health minister for Gaza, actually put out a call for help in terms of the shortages of medicine. He put this call out to NGOs. Now, remarkably, you arrived at the head of a convoy, Miles 3. Tell me, what was the purpose of this convoy? What did it contain, and how significant do you think its arrival?
Well, our convoy is a life-saving convoy. We are coming to save the children of Gaza. We are here to save the disabled. We are here to save the elderly. We are here to save the people of Gaza from dying. And we brought with us, we tried to bring as much as we can. And because the Rafah entry is only for medical supplies and medical equipment and something like that. So our convoy is a medical convoy. And we have been asked to bring only 10 items of the medicine which is zero value in Gaza. And alhamdulillah, we brought this with us. We have brought some ambulances, we have brought some buses for disabled, we have bring some computers for the blind. We're lucky somehow, but this cannot sustain the life in Gaza.
Now, I've spoken to the former head of affairs for Palestine for UNRWA, John Ging. He's now been transferred to New York, but he suggested recently that up to 70% of the medicines brought by convoys and relief flotillas ended up tragically having to be destroyed due to the fact that it was either not on the essential drugs list or that it was often drugs that the specialists felt they couldn't sustain treatment with because they might not get access to them again later on down the line. Now, how important is it for those bringing in medicines to do so in full coordination